Good evening, and welcome to Northshire Bookstore's first virtual event of 2023. My name is David Wood, an events manager here, and before we get started, just a quick note, please type any questions that you have into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window at any time. I'll save those up and pose them for you towards the end of tonight's event. And also a note of thanks. Independent bookselling is not the easiest business in the best of times, and the last few years have been challenging to say the least. So Northshire owes its continued existence to your support, and we thank you greatly for it. But tonight, it is my great pleasure to welcome Brandon Ying Kit Boey tonight for his new book, Karma of the Sun. Brandon is a novelist, poet, and lawyer living in Maine. Hailing from California, he was educated at NYU and Brigham Young University Law School, and has worked as a child actor, an intern at Marvel, an investment banker, and a lawyer, among other things. Early reviewers have called Karma of the Sun a propulsive tale of adventure, sacrifice, and salvation, set in Tibet in a frighteningly apocalyptic future and grounded in family, love, and a profound search for the self. That with silken prose and atmospheric grandeur, Brandon's elegantly assured debut is beautiful, moving, and vast in its spiritual and emotional scope, calling Karma of the Sun a hero's journey for the end of the world. And we are lucky today to be joined by Dr. Helga Schier, the editorial director of CamCat Publishing, a publisher of award-winning quality genre fiction, and Brandon's editor on Karma of the Sun. She's the founder and owner of the editorial services firm with penandpaper.com. For 25 years, Helga has served as editor and executive editor in publishing houses large and small. She's lectured on literature and creative writing, published essays on contemporary fiction, and translated several screenplays, memoirs, and novels from and into German. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire Bookstore, Dr. Helga Schier and Brandon Ying Kit Boey.
Hello. Thanks so much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So it is my pleasure to chat with you today, Brandon, on your launch day of Karma of the Sun, which is absolutely awesome. The book comes out today from CamCat, and we are absolutely thrilled, with the advanced reviews that have come out. So just to make sure that everybody has a little bit of an idea of what your story is about, can you just give us a very quick summary so that those who have not yet read the book, which will be most of our listeners, know what we are talking about?
Of course, it would be my pleasure. Karma of the Sun is about the end of the world, and it's set in Tibet. And it follows the story of a young Tibetan Sherpa who grows up under this prophecy of the end of the world and sets out on the eve of the apocalypse, wanting to search for and see his father for one last time. And as he takes on this journey, discovers a secret to potentially averting this worldwide final cataclysm.
That's awesome. That sounds really, really, really exciting. And there's so many things in there that I want to talk about. But the very first question that I have for you, because most people are always interested in that, is what inspired this novel for you? How did you come up with this idea?
Yes, that's a great question. There were a couple of things. First off, I had never seen a post-apocalyptic novel or a movie set in Asia. And I thought that was strange because there's such a rich tradition and rich source of material about the end of the world. I mean, some of it quite fantastical and almost reads like a movie. And coming across some of these Tibetan and other Eastern texts, I always just thought, somebody should write this. So that's one reason. And on that point, I thought it was very interesting that there are all these world cultures from disparate places, and they all have this creation story and an end of the world story, a belief in the apocalypse. And I wrote this at a time when things were arguably quite bleak. Many people were asking themselves, are we near the end? time of worldwide pandemic, civil unrest, wars, and it made me ask, the question: if we all believe in the end of the world, what does that say about our faith in humanity? And what does this say to this younger generation as they're just starting off their lives, or really any of us? If there are these prophecies, and if they're true, or if we believe that they're true, then what is the role of individual action? What can we as just ordinary people do against such a big weight as that, a prophecy about the end of the world? So I wanted to take this this question and put somebody in the extreme situation of, yes, the world definitely is going to end. We know that because based on these real world prophecies that describe 7 apocalyptic suns, after which the series of these suns, the world will end. Let's set the story after the first 6 suns have already occurred. So these people know they're the last bastion of civilization, and they're these people who live in the Himalayas, and they're waiting for this 7th apocalyptic sun, which I interpret to be a nuclear blast. So you have this young protagonist who grows up in the shadow of this prophecy, knows the world is going to end, is told this all the time, and is even told that he's personally cursed because of his karma, because of his father. What can he do? What will he do?
No, that's awesome. There's a lot of things that I actually want to touch upon, but basically, what you are saying is that this story is about, a generation of people, if you will, who are faced with the end of the world. And therefore the question becomes, do they just let it all go and accept that there is an utter endpoint, or will they somehow try and resist? And looking at it this way, I actually want to quote somebody, Margaret Atwood, who once said that in every dystopia there's a little utopia. So I wonder, that I'm assuming, does that ring true for your novel, or not really? Is there something that, after the end of the world, so to speak?
Yeah, it's such a great multifaceted question, because there is something. I think there is an element of truth in that. Definitely, a utopia in every dystopia. It must be, for us to all want to read these types of books. I mean, post-apocalyptic novels and movies are very popular,
Yes.
and you would think that wouldn't be the case in times that maybe seem already bleak, or why wouldn't people just gravitate to lighter fare? But I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One is this element of utopia in every dystopia. There's a scene in the book where I'm describing this winter wasteland where everything's frozen, everything is dead in the Himalayas, and he comes across this red berry, this cotton Easter plant, and it's encased in ice. And I love that imagery of the world may look dead, things may look dead, but there is still life contained within. And sometimes having this bleak apocalyptic landscape where everything is gone, everything is removed, you really declutter the field. You remove all the illusions of life, and what you're left with once you remove illusion is you're left with truth. And there's nothing more beautiful, nothing more utopian than truth.
That's so beautiful, Brandon. I mean, which makes me, actually, I want to quickly mention how beautifully written your book is. And I'm sure we'll have it. I'm hoping anyway that we'll have a chance for you to read, a paragraph, but it's a beautifully written book. And when I hear you talking about it, I can just, remember Karma speaking, Karma being the main character of your novel. But let me go back to the idea of that, that there's truth, or that there is something after the apocalypse. The apocalypse, of course, for the individual, what the apocalypse means is the end of life. We will die, we will be gone, that's it. So I am wondering if the fact that you are writing this with a perspective of Asian religion, of Asian philosophy, and all the traditions that, of course, are quite different from Western and Christian and Jewish traditions. If you would give me an idea of what you think is really different about writing an end of the world scenario from that perspective than it is from a Western perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I'll start with the similarities before contrasting with the differences. The similarities are mind-boggling. How all these world cultures believe in, a creation and believe in an end, as we said, believe in some sort of gathering at a mountain, at a temple structure, and even very specific references to a stone that can see into the past, the present, and the future, a malleability of time and space that happens towards the end. The word apocalypse, which you mentioned, of course, is based on the Greek word that actually means revelation or an uncovering. So an apocalypse is an end, but maybe it's also the start of a different perception of these things. So those are sort of some of the remarkable similarities. The differences that I think really propel this story is because we're all familiar with end of the world stories set in Western civilizations, Western cities. Here you have a group of people who are removed from all of that, and they also have a belief in some form or another in reincarnation. So the end of the world to these folks isn't just an end to their own lives. It is potentially an end to all lives, because if the world is gone and destroyed, to where will you be reincarnated? And that's why in the book you have these ghosts who are dead, these spirits who are mourning the end of the world. They haunt the earth, and they hear them wailing at night, bemoaning the end to their progression, their eternal progression. And I think these people, these characters, have a much different view and connection to the earth. They're stewards of the earth because they know that after this life, they will literally be back. And so they have a long-term view. But if the world is gone, then it's doubly tragic.
Yes. You just said that the spirits mourn, the end of the world. So let me ask you, what do you believe, your characters feel needs to be mourned? So if we mourn something, we believe that it would be worthy of preserving. So what is there that should be, or that deserves preserving? And is this what Karma is after in his search?
Yes, I think it is. I think Karma especially has a significant need because he personally never had a relationship with his father. And so the end is it's so sudden. And we all face this, right? In some ways, every book is an apocalypse. We can all relate to the apocalyptic story because the world literally ends for all of us. And I think we know this, and that's why we turn to this type of fiction in hopes that we find inspiration for how to live. And so I think Karma is confounded when he's at this point in life where he feels like he's being told the world is going to end, everything is futile. And he takes on what is essentially a futile search for his father, to fill this gap because he wants to. But in taking that step, he sets off a course of a chain of events that can potentially change the fate of the world. So, he's mourning the past that he never had with his father. He's mourning the future that he will never have, and he's trying to figure out what to do in the present, given that.
We should probably say that Karma is a very young man, so this is really not, it is very much a coming of age story as well, where Karma grows into his own role by, his search for his father, and the realization that, well, I can't say much, but the realization that, that there are things for him to do in the future that are there. I wanted to quote somebody else, actually, because you did say that that we are, Ali Condi once said that when we read dystopias, and this going back to what we just talked about, we root for these people to break free because we are these people, hoping and fighting against things that are bigger than ourselves. So my assumption is that, that I think, I am actually as surprised as you were that, that escapist fiction, even though it did have quite a surge, during the pandemic, but that it was not, the only kind of material that was being read, but that we really also wanted to read those doomsday scenarios. And perhaps it is that we can see ourselves in those characters. I always feel that fiction, is there for us to try out certain scenarios so that we can handle our own lives better. Granted, we're not going to, be trekking through the Himalayas trying to save the world, but we do come up a lot of very, very difficult, events in our life as well. So I definitely, feel that you are onto something there, that the idea, dystopia and utopia and hope and all of that is still there. Now, you mentioned the setting, and I find, that the end of the world scenario that you've created is intuitively palpable. If you open your book, you are right there in the middle, in this frozen winterland. And many times while I was reading your book, I felt cold. Quite seriously, because there was snow everywhere and ice, and it's hard to put on the fire. And it's wonderful how you've created, the setting of your world. So the landscape itself, the Himalayan wasteland, is so important in your story. And we touched upon it a little bit, how it differs from Western end of the world scenarios. But I also wanted to, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because many utopias I know play in larger cities, whereas the one where you are, not at all. But I wanted to know, how do you feel this wasteland and this remoteness shaped your characters? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for me, as I was writing this, the landscape, the land actually became something of like a character itself.
Yeah.
You get the feeling that the earth is dying, and if the earth is dying, that means the earth must be alive. So you see it in the heaving movements of the land shifting, the earthquakes, the incessant earthquakes, where they fall asleep and then they wake up, and then the land has reorganized as different. The earth is wobbling so that when they look at the stars at night, they don't even recognize where they are. They can't navigate. And it's almost like the earth has stopped being able to take care of them because they have stopped taking care of it. They were up to this point protected from the nuclear fallout by the Himalayas, but now the mountains have all crumbled. So this relationship, this symbiotic relationship between man and nature, the earth, is not reliable anymore. And it's all through, by the way, no fault of these people. They are living with the karma of their predecessors. So there's this element of time and space, this continuum that never ends, this cycle, and they can't escape it. Past, present, and future blend together. The dead, the living, they all blend together, and the stage for all that is the highlands or the Himalayas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, that very true. You're the fact that this is a heritage, if you will, that your characters are living with, that they have absolutely, they are not at fault. Karma is so young and hence innocent, if you will. In fact, many of your characters are very innocent, and I might even, I remember we had a conversation about, the potential naivete of those characters and their emotional innocence, really, about their situation and where they're going. And I thought that was really very interesting and very different from what I think, Western perspective would be, because in a Western perspective, I don't mean this critical at all, but there's often a lot of blame placed, as to what caused the horrible conditions that we find ourselves in. And I don't feel your book is doing that at all. It is much rather, a group of people that is faced with a situation that they may or may not have had all that much to do, and now they are stuck and they need to figure out what they can do. So I wanted to, I definitely wanted to point that out. So if you feel, if the landscape is that important, do you generally feel that our surroundings make us who we are, or do we have an influence on our surroundings, and how does that, connect with that end of the world scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Our surroundings definitely influence who we are. Growing up in that sort of landscape versus growing up in, like you said, a Western city. But we also do shape our surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these people are very nomadic, so that's another interesting element of, what is it like when your world keeps changing and you keep having to move? You would tend to be a little bit detached, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like humans need to attach to something. So then who are you attaching to? Is it people? Is it, some sort of hope? I think people who are untethered can react in a lot of different ways, and we see that. We see some people turn to darkness. We see some people behave very badly towards each other, bringing out the worst elements of human nature, because there's nothing that's tethering them. There's no consequence, not even reincarnation, right? Not even an afterlife. And then you have other people like Karma who are innocent, don't really know what to believe, but they are motivated by something else. He's not born a hero. There is a sort of chosen one motif,
Yeah.
but there is no chosen one. And I think he makes that journey for us to realize that it's all of us. It's ordinary people who, based on our ordinary surroundings, rise to the occasion.
Yes, I know. And we can't really talk that much more about the idea of chosen one and the way you are, turning that on its head, because it would give a little bit too much away. The only thing I want to say is that this is one of the I don't know, philosophical twists that you made in the story that touched me greatly, and that I really thought was absolutely awesome, because in a way you go into the story believing one thing, and you come out really believing or knowing something very, very different. You said that, given that this is a nomad culture that Karma grew up in, I want to talk about Karma, his name, as well as the concept, as well as him as a person now. So you said that the lifestyle of his tribe, or of his people, I should say, is that they are untethered. But I actually, when we haven't used that word at all when you and I talked about it, but I actually never had the sense that Karma was untethered at all. I actually felt that he was very much tethered to his community, even as he leaves his community. So can you speak to that? Do I see something, that you didn't mean to put in, or is this just a reaction that I have to it months after reading it for the first time? So
yeah, absolutely. And that may be one difference between him and some of the other tribes, some of the bandits, for example. They all have their respective communities, but Karma's is different. And you're right, absolutely. In the beginning of the book, they do have a village. They're forced to leave, unfortunately, and then they become displaced. They become refugees. And what does that have? What impact that has on their psyche? But yes, he is tethered because he has his mother there, his younger cousin. The villagers, they are his people, even though many of them look down on him because of this perceived curse
Yes.
that he has, because his father is an outsider and all of that. And he has to leave that, and he has to evolve. He cannot rely on this village anymore. In some ways, he's outgrown them, and he transitions to something else and ends up having to leave them. So I guess this goes to your point. Your surroundings, or your change in surroundings, can force you to evolve and change. Change is always difficult, as we know. And in this character, it ends up being very, very difficult. Tests him like he never imagines. And he gets hurt. He loses a lot, but he grows and evolves towards the end.
Yes, because just also to make sure for the audience that the audience knows, this is very much an adventure story, definitely an adventure story with lots of depth, but there is that fast-paced read aspect to this novel as well, in the sense that this young man goes out to find his father and save the world, essentially, and comes in his journey far away from his village. He comes across other bandits, other communities, other cities, or not cities, I shouldn't say that, but other villages, and needs to fight many different characters on his journey. And of course he also meets young women, young people among his of his own age, and brushes up against all of that. So that entire adventure aspect and growing up aspect is in this story as well. So it is not only a story of doom and gloom, very much on the contrary. It's very much an adventure story. But let's talk about Karma. First of all, I don't know if you want to start with his name. That's up to you. But you did choose this name knowing full well that we all have most likely a very rudimentary idea of what karma actually is. I know that my understanding of it is very limited, so can you maybe talk about that a little, about the term and what it means, and also why you chose it for karma?
Yeah, karma is actually quite a common unisex name in Tibet. And absolutely, we all have a familiarity with karma. The kind of Western definition of karma is the what goes around comes around concept, and there's a little bit of truth to that. The Eastern view of karma is also something else in addition to that, which is something more akin to individual action, individual agency, individual power. So I wanted that name because karma kind of goes back and forth between having this fatalistic view of his destiny, sort of, I've inherited this bad karma from my father.
Can you actually just be a little bit more specific about that without giving too much away?
Sure.
What is it that he's inherited?
Yeah, so his father is a Sherpa, and joined this village, his mother's village, many years ago. And 10 years prior to the start of this story, decides to leave that village, leave Karma and his mother and the villagers, this place that he's made home, to go and search for a sanctuary in the mountains, and never returns. Meanwhile, he's taken yaks with him. He's taken some of their provisions. He's taken some of their people, and so they view this as a betrayal. That a theft of property, and they have evidence to feel that way. And so Karma is very young at the time when his father leaves, and he's growing up with this on top of everything else. So he's feeling pretty insecure, and that's the karma that he has. But then he crosses over because he wants to see his father one last time. The world is going to end anyway, and so against everybody's wishes, he decides he's going to strike out and look for his father. And so then that small decision, changes makes him take control of his life and cross over into that, other definition of karma.
With youthful recklessness, one could
Yes.
say, I mean, that is definitely part of karma. He is so rash and youthful and
Yeah.
lots of energy, and you're like, God, what are you doing when you're reading
Yeah.
it? And it makes a lot of sense. What do you perceive, to be karma's strengths and weaknesses, and how do they help him in the rest of the story?
Because of that inexperience and that rashness and that naivete that you mentioned, he kind of becomes a magnet for other people to help him, isn't it? And it's a weird, superpower, but
I like that.
yeah,
Yes. Uh-huh.
I think we all want to be people that can attract other people to come and help us along the way. So there he does have that going for him. He has a nun, an older woman who helps him. Yeah, there's a young woman that you mentioned, who's a fighter and a rebel, who comes to his aid and believes in him when others don't. And he also has a gift that he inherits from his father, which is seen at first as, I'm not sure if I want to have anything to do with my father, but it's ability to hear the sound of a Sherpa's horn. He doesn't know if it's imagined or not, but that was the impetus for his father's journey, where he had left the mountains and always felt this guilt that he did when the mountains crumbled and collapsed. He knew his kinfolk were dead, and so he starts to hear these haunting horn sounds calling to him, and so that's why he leaves. That's why Karma's father leaves. Karma soon begins to be convinced that he too hears these, and he actually doesn't at first, but then later on you can see that changing. So that as itself is a gift, that level of faith to be led on without knowing what's in front of you, and then having the answer manifested to you just because you keep going and put one foot in front of the other. And then that leads to another gift, which is people follow you in a time when people need leaders.
Yes, very much so. And we do live in that time. Perhaps there is never a time where we don't need leaders, but we certainly are in a time where that is, the case as well. Now, this is a mythological novel. I do agree with that, absolutely. But this is also, as I said before, an adventure story. And I also feel that it is very, very grounded in human emotions. So I read this, of course, as your editor, but also just as a person. And I'm a mother myself, so I read it, like very much as the mother of a karma type. And I really, what just completely convinced me about this story is that it is so based in human emotions. And so I wanted to ask you what you consider to be the themes. Oops, my dog is down here. I'm sorry about that. What you consider to be like the themes that are in this novel as well, in addition to the philosophical background.
I think one theme is going to have to be hope.
Yes.
This is a situation where it's absolutely certain that the world is going to end. Mm-hmm. And they have every reason to believe that because it has already ended. So the whole time, these characters are grappling with what to believe, what to even hope for. There's this rite of passage early on in the book where the shaman is essentially giving these blessings to young men and young women in these villages that have gathered. And it's sad because those who are receiving it, their parents, their guardians all know that none of these are going to come to pass. So it's like, why are they doing this? Why do we persist as humans in having hope when, we know otherwise? Why are we so deluded? But the answer is maybe no, not that we're deluded, but maybe we sense something else, that we sense that even in the end, it is a beginning. But it takes a lot of courage to look at things that way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely beautiful, and this is exactly what I saw in the story and what grew on me as I was writing it, as I was reading it. I wish I'd been writing it, but as I was reading and editing it. So I do want to have time to read a little bit of a portion. So I'm only going to ask you one more question before we go to reading maybe an excerpt, and that is, if there's one thing you'd want your readers to take away from the story, what do you think it is?
Well, let's see. One thing to take away from the story. Can I say two things, actually?
Please.
Yes. I feel like they're equally important.
Uh-huh.
One is the fact that it's easy to read the story of these people and say, there are all these factions, there are all these tribes, all these gangs, and they're all fighting each other when the world is about to end. It doesn't make any sense. Why is that? And to be angry and to be frustrated at why humans can do this to each other, and to ask, why aren't they working together? It looks like they have a real chance. If they believe that this mountain exists, that's potentially a sanctuary. If they believe that there's this chosen one and this llama child who's been reincarnated, and they have to find this person, why not work together? Why do they persist in fighting over really nothing? Like there's nothing left in the world, and yet we believe that that's what would happen. I would say turn that around and apply that to our world today, when we live in a time of comparative abundance and resources. Why even more so do we persist in fighting? Why are we contentious? Why are we so provincial in our mindset instead of embracing each other to solve the real problems of the world? We have the technology, we have the intelligence and the ability to do that. Why not? So are they any different than us, or is their situation any more bleak than ours? Well, what can we do differently?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. The second thing is, I think one of the characters says this, Nima, who's Karma's friend, says, go left, go right, doesn't really matter. Just as long as you keep moving. It's not the end yet. The world may end. The end comes for us all, but it's not today. So if we die, at least we die facing the sun.
Yeah.
So I think that's the message.
Yes, and that is very much the message I actually took away from it, is that once we literally, and it's not over until it's over, which is certainly not like new or brilliant, but it is definitely a beautiful take. And all of that said, do you have a little paragraph that you could read to us, so that we can hear the beautiful writing that you have given to us? That would be awesome.
Sure. You had mentioned that we might want to do this, so I had flipped through it. It was actually very difficult to find one short part. So I found a section.
I also have to say that I just love that you quoted the young girl, that because that is one of my favorite pieces. Go right, go left, it doesn't matter, just go. That's one of my favorite scenes. But go ahead, I'm sure you have another one. Yeah.
Well, so this is from chapter 21, and throughout the book, as you know, Helga, there are these interludes, these parts that are, the story pauses and there's some background to kind of fill out this world. And so this is one of those parts. And I had flipped through this the other day, and so I thought I'd share this part. In the beginning was the void, so it was said. Void was the world, and of the void came the world at the sound of the heavens. Om, rumbling forth from the darkness, traveling, rippling, like the echo of a thunderclap in the distance, filling an expanse. From its sound, a division of light from dark. It is a wall of fire, churning, roiling, winds like the blast of a furnace, vapors rising into the clouds. Om. Next were the roaring waters, the deluge of rains rushing, crashing, waves overflowing, and on these waters also the sound moved. Molten flows from the deep, their heat mixing with the seas, form rock, diverging, transforming, converging into the first primordial mound, dry land, colliding, pressing towards sky. The Himalayas, the land of snows, rise. The 4 rivers and 6 ranges, whose valleys hold the cradle of life, trees, plants, flower, herb, root, and seed, fish swim, fowl flock, full roam the land, and other beasts. Fa Tralgen, the ape man, who walked upright and climbed the mountain, who here communed with the traveler from the stars, and in their union formed man and his race. Thus began the 6 tribes, and these are their ages, the first, the second, the third, and the fourth, truth, loss, discontentment, vice. From whence we came, to thence will we return. As the sun rises in the east, so it shall set in the west. So too must our bodies return to the earth. For as dust we are, and to dust we will go. Yet if all things need be as they first were, then to the final place will we also return, to our place among the stars. Look to the mountain, Father said, look to the stone. Listen for the Dharma horn to take us home. Look before it crumbles, returning to the sea of fire, the sea of glass, the sea that sees all and what will come to pass.
Thank you. That is beautiful. Thank you so much. David, I still have other questions. Actually, I would like to ask one more question, which is a little bit of a like a tongue-in-cheek question that is more about, Brandon himself, because you just mentioned the seeing stone in your paragraph. That seeing stone has magical qualities. And so I want to ask you, Brandon, if you had a chance to look into that seeing stone, what would you want to see, or what would you hope to see, I should probably say?
Well, I think I would hesitate to look into a seeing stone that had that ability. Only the most impeccable, the most incorruptible Lama, I think, would be prepared to look into a stone like that could see past, present, and future, and also give that individual the ability to change it. So I would say I probably would not look into it.
That's very interesting. Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you so much for that conversation, Brandon.
Thank you, Helga.
Yeah. David,
well, thank you both so much.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic. And Brandon, that was a beautiful passage of cosmogony and apocalypse. Wonderful.
Yes.
Audience, please type any questions you have into the Q&A box. Helga's got some more should they come up. But I'd like to start with a question, and that's if you could both talk a little bit about the editorial process for Karma. Sure. How was your relationship, and expand on that, please.
I'll let Brandon start with that.
Oh, that is a great question. I was going to say, because if there are questions, I have questions for Helga as to the process. Well, I'll say this, that the process of working Helga was very enjoyable. It was very pleasurable to just have someone that had Helga's vision and understanding work with me to fine tune and to polish this story. So I would love to hear Helga's perspective. Is what is it like when you get a manuscript that has already gone through years of work, countless drafts? How do you just begin? How do you start? And what do you know? How do you know what changes to make, and when you've gone too far, when you haven't gone far enough?
I think it depends a little bit on the story and how polished and how advanced the story is and how accomplished the writer is. But in general, the idea of, I'm a development editor, so what I do has very little to do with grammar, commas, and periods, although they always come into play as well. But I am not the one to really hope to find the right places for commas. So I'm looking more at the big picture. And the big picture approach basically means that you read a book and you see as a reader first what you think is in that book, and then you try and help the author just punch it up. A development editor is not an editor. No editor is somebody who imposes his or their opinion or their vision on a work. It is someone who digs deep and sees it and works it out. And most of the time, it really is about clarity. How can you make what you want to say, or what the writer wanted to say, clear to the reader, and how do you make sure that there is very little opportunity for a reader to misunderstand. And that's really what you are doing. And what that takes is, just close reading, if you will. My process is I read it once quickly. I mean, I don't rush through it, but I read it once quickly, and then I go through it and make comments about anything that might come to my mind. But with a novel like Karma, this was very much a matter of just being clear. I did not think that there were I did not at all mess with your vision of this manuscript, not one bit, because it was right there. It was really more a matter of making what I thought you wanted to say clear to a Western audience, because I think that really is what it is. And obviously for that, it was pretty helpful that I am, very, firmly implanted in the Western tradition and had, a lot of questions for you. So, and this probably is the most important thing for an editor. An editor has to be curious, has to ask questions, has to look behind what it is that an author might want to say. And I think it's very different from the writing process in one way, but in another, it is not, because I'm assuming that you as an author are doing the same thing. So you have this vision of these characters, and then you keep writing about them. You keep asking yourself questions as to how they would behave and how they would act, and so my question, one of the questions that I did not get to ask it is, what is your writing process? How long did it take you? And there's this difference between plotters and pantsers. For those listening who don't know that, there's, some writers plan or, like chart out their work, and others don't. And I don't think I know that about you, Brandon. I don't know where you belong and how you got to writing. I mean, that's another one of my questions. You're a lawyer. What made you write such a book?
Yeah. Yes. Surprisingly, a lot of lawyers are closet writers. I think it's, the words that attracts them to that profession, and literature as well. The first thing I ever wanted to be from a young child was to be a novelist. And so I've been writing my entire life, a lot of poetry, short stories, plays, and Karma of the Sun is my first novel. But it took, quite a few drafts. It was 3 different novels that finally made it to this version over many years. And I am definitely a plotter, someone that likes to do research and outline and know kind of the shape and contours of the story, get kind of the beats, and then once that's complete, I let it all go and I just write, feeling confident that I know the direction that it's going. There's a saying that to write what you know, and I believe that's true, definitely. But I believe you write it until you know it. So lots of drafts.
Yes, yeah, I can imagine. How long did it take you? Year-wise, how many years did you work on that?
This version was about 3 years, altogether about 10 years.
10 years.
10 years, yeah. So 3 years, the first iteration of the story, another 3 years the next, and then another 3 years this final iteration. Yeah, it just never felt ready yet, so I just kept going back at it. You know, I would switch gears and work on a different story, a different book, and then come back to this, just let it have time to marinate. So it was a long process leading up to launch day today.
For
Well,
sure.
congratulations, Brandon.
Yeah.
We've got
Thank you.
an audience question here from Martha, who's one of our regulars in Manchester. And she says, I've not read the book yet, but from hearing your discussion tonight, are there metaphorical parallels with the actual history of Tibet in the 1950s and 60s? She says, for some Buddhist practitioners and teachers in Tibet, it was the end of their world.
Yeah, that's a very astute question. Certainly there is. And I think if you read kind of between the lines and the backstory as to what got them to that point, Tibet has, is a beautiful country that has gone through a lot. They've had a tumultuous history. And, to some extent, they pine for the days when, they were conquerors, right? They had a very different past. And so I think this story is an echo of that history, that past, and also feeds into this theme of cycles, that history repeating itself, playing out the same thing over and over until we can, we can actually learn from our mistakes.
Can I, is there another question?
Not right now, please go
Not
ahead.
right now. So how did you, I mean, you from your bio, and I also know you grew up in the United States. You've lived here all your life. Am I right, Brandon?
Yes.
So
I was born in the United States, and I grew up moving frequently. So every 3 years, kind of packing up and moving. I spent a large part of my childhood in Asia, in China, and have traveled, throughout the region. So it was a very transitory childhood, and now I live in Maine, in the United States.
So I didn't know that you lived in Asia for part of your childhood, but still it feels like that you must have done a lot of, quote unquote, research, into the materials that you're using, research of an outsider, or do you not feel that way? Do you, so how were you so interested in this aspect? Obviously you are Asian American, but still, how did you do the research? Was your home life growing up, or is it now steeped in Asian traditions?
I think so. And I think out of personal interest, I read a lot, history, but also going to some of these primary texts, the sutras, the Lotus Sutra, the Pali Canon, which I quote from. I'm not an expert by any means, or many people know a lot more. And then being just fascinated by these parallels in Buddhist texts and Hindu Puranas and Judeo-Christian texts. That was sort of the impetus. And then a lot of my own travel experiences in northern China, western China, around that area, fed into the world building.
Okay.
Well, we are almost out of time. So if there's any last notes you'd like to leave us with, please suggest them, or I can ask your question too. Well, all right, I will ask the question. Can you expand a little bit on what literary influences you've got, Brenda?
Well, I have a very wide-ranging, eclectic range of literary taste. I grew up reading a lot of fantasy, and then, in my sort of elementary school years, I read a lot of Stephen King, hence the main connection. You know, a lot of time in, you know, what's kind of deemed like classic literature. My favorite novel is To Catcher in the Rye. I will say I really gravitate to a lot of diaspora fiction. You know, people who are writing outside of their own background. Either they're displaced or they're traveling, like the expatriates living in Europe, you know, like Hemingway at the time, or, you know, people like Jhumpa Lahiri, Khalid Hosseini, folks like that, because I relate to that. I, like I said, moved around a lot. Growing up, never felt like I fully belonged, whether in the West or in the East, always having an outsider's perspective. I think it was good training as a writer to, you know, always be examining your surroundings and yourself and other people. And so, you know, that's what I think speaks most to me. And that's, I can look back and see, you know, yeah, literary influences from that, from those writers. Also, I think for this book, there was a lot of influence from religious texts, you know, wanting to kind of keep that, like, what if this tome was a record of these last people, you know, if Karma of the Sun was the book of karma, right? What would that be like? How would this record be? So, you know, some of that poetic language that you see in the sutras and other religious texts, I tried to incorporate into the writing.
That's very interesting, actually. I never realized that. But you know, I mean, as an author, you are an observant, and you watch what's going on around you. And because you just mentioned being, you know, an outsider, I'm an, you know, if you will, an outsider as well. I was raised and grew up in Germany, came here in my late 20s. So I not that I feel like an outsider, but of course I do have an outside point of view because I am not, you know, I did not grow up here. And I think you have a much sharper view of your environs if you don't, you know, if you're not, you know, I don't know, intrinsically connected to them. But that has not only given me perhaps a more sharper vision of the United States or California, but really also of my home country. I see things about that, or about that mentality, those the personalities over there that I did not necessarily see while I was in there. And I think that's very interesting that you consider that as part of what you've done here, looking at, you know, this as a double outsider. So that's really quite interesting.
You know what else is interesting that I don't know if you have the same experience, but writing about a place when you're no longer there.
Yeah.
So, and I lived in New York City for a long time, and the writing I did about New York City when I was living in New York, I feel like was not any good. And now that I'm away, you know, when I write it's sort of like you're pining for it, and it comes out in a different way. I spent a lot of my childhood years in Shanghai and Singapore. And so I'm dying to write about those experiences. My next book is set in Shanghai, and it spans, you know, different eras in Shanghai, and it's very cathartic to unpack the things that you've been carrying around, you know, the experiences that you had. It feels more real when you're not there. You can just pick the right elements, because writing is all about decisions. You know, of a blank sheet of paper, what do I put? Do I describe everything in the room? Well, it's an emotion. So your mind latches onto those things, and that's what finds its way on the paper.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. If you have distance, you can see
You need
more
distance.
clearly. Yes,
Yeah.
I think you can see more clearly. I don't know that you necessarily see better, but, you know, better in the sense that you are more right than when you're in the middle of it, because in a way, I think you just see different things if you're in the middle of it, or if with distance. But I think with distance, you can it's just that there's a form of clarity. It's similar with hindsight. You can just draw conclusions that you can't when you're smack dab in the middle, and potentially lost, in that middle. So
it's true for art, but it's a good life, probably a life aphorism as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Well, Brandon, Helga, thank you both so much. Brandon, congratulations on launch day for Karma of the Sun. You can order it at northshire.com. I put the link in the chat a few times, or in the store. Thank you both so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you at another Northshire event sometime soon.
Yes, please.
Goodbye.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.